Today, we're going to be analyzing Mike Winger's sermon on non-believers.
And it's just, all we're really doing is giving them more truth to reject at some point. And that's what Jesus is dealing with. He wants to deal with the heart of the issue. He disapproves of their motives because it's like they're building up an immunity to evidence, an immunity to proof. And sometimes that's what I see from people who are really aggressively against the truth of Christianity, is they build up an immunity to discovering the truth of Christ.
The only immunity I'm building up is an immunity to bad arguments and magical religious ideas. So Mike Winger has an hour-long sermon about why non-believers just simply won't accept the truth of Christianity. He starts out talking about the dangers of non-believers questioning the claims and validity of Christianity.
This is about the danger of seeking to disprove Christianity. I really mean that. Now, I want to take this and have a nuanced view of this topic, but the danger basically in seeking to disprove Christianity is that you find what you want. People often just find what they want.
Mike is basically mad with non-believers because they apply critical thought to what they believe, because that's exactly what he's described here. If you go looking to prove your hypothesis, then you're only going to find evidence that proves your hypothesis. Just because you find something that proves your hypothesis does not necessarily mean that your hypothesis is true. For instance, take gravity as Newton describes it. Now we call that a Newtonian description of physics. And it really only works on small scales for answering questions like, why do things fall down? Einstein's theories of how gravity works extends that description and changes gravity from a real force to a fictitious force that is produced by the warping of space-time. Einstein only investigated this because Newtonian physics wasn't able to describe everything in reality. So here, Mike talks about it being dangerous to try and disprove Christianity. But really, that's the only way you can know that it will stand up to scrutiny, which Christianity can't do. Since we can't rely on any particular evidence to prove our theories or hypotheses to be correct, the only way to know if your hypothesis is correct is by trying to find something that can disprove it. If you can find something to disprove it, then it definitely is not correct. Mike simply doesn't want you to apply any kind of critical thought to his religion, because in reality, critical thought destroys his religion.
Now, I'm not talking here about people who have sincere questions and they're genuinely seeking. Like, I really am trying to find truth.
What he really means is people that will immediately buy his answers without applying any kind of critical thought to those answers. Listen and believe mentality is a staple of apologists. And that's exactly what Mike wants you to do here. Just listen and believe his answer.
I'm talking about a different person when you add on to that an element of, and man, I really don't want this thing to be true. That is a spiritually dangerous position. And we're going to talk about how Jesus responds to those who ultimately are pretending they want evidence. Maybe they even think they want evidence. They think it's real, that this is what they're seeking.
Here, Mike is applying an unfounded motivation on those that question Christianity, but are not immediately convinced by the answer that he gives them. According to Mike, if you remain unconvinced by any explanation that he gives you, which is not something that you control, then it means that you don't want Christianity to be true, and you're just pretending to want evidence for it. Assuming intent or motivation is an asshole thing to do. It's not my fault that your tired, unconvincing arguments aren't good enough. Maybe you should try and get better arguments for your faith. Then I guess it really wouldn't be faith, now would it?
But this is like a plague on the internet. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've done plenty of witnessing and sharing with people where when they ask tough questions and then they get good, what are really good answers, not just pat answers, good answers to tough questions. And you realize they liked the question better than the answer. And so they just change the subject, right? When I get a questioner who gets a good answer and they're actually more bothered with an answer than they are with silence, that's when I'm like, okay, what's going on?
They are good answers to you, Mike. That doesn't mean that they are actually good answers. You have got to come to grips with the fact that some people are just not as easily convinced as you are. Mike is reinforcing that unless somebody is immediately convinced by whatever explanation he gives them, then they simply just don't want an answer and are maliciously asking questions. This is a quick way to weed out people that don't adhere to the listen and believe mentality. They don't need people that are going to think critically about Christianity. At least, not too critically. Mike goes on to read from Mark about how Jesus is freestyling with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are like, hold up, wait a minute. How do we know you're really the Messiah? And Jesus be like, no signs for you, bitch. Mike goes on to explain how the Pharisees have separated themselves from the Jewish general population. This makes a lot of sense theologically because the entire point of the New Testament is to overthrow the existing Jewish religion. So, of course, it would portray them as being out of touch with the Jewish community. Then he says this.
And they seem to always come with animosity. They come to cause problems. They come to challenge him in some fashion or another, or to expose some error. In other words, they're not seekers. They show up occasionally and they show up adversarially when they're encountering Jesus. In Mark 3:6, it tells us that already we learn this, that they were plotting to destroy him with the Herodians. Like they're actually planning already to destroy Jesus. So when they ask these questions, what sign do you do to prove that you are who you say you are? This is not a question that's meant like, really, we like to see, we like to know. It's rather meant to challenge, to refute, or to push against Christ. It's combative. It's not actually testing Jesus. And that's key to understanding why Jesus has such an extreme response, why he's like, no sign for you. I mean, this is a really extreme response from Jesus, but it's extreme for a reason, and we can learn from it.
He's setting up this story from Jesus to illustrate to his congregation that non-believers are already against Jesus and the truth of Christianity, just like the Pharisees are. Later in the sermon, he even directly says that this is what he's doing.
Because it's stubborn unbelief. It's not about evidence here. Not about evidence. So I want to be careful here with Jesus' words. You see how applicable they are today? Who are the modern Pharisees? In some ways, it's atheism. In some ways, it's agnosticism. In some way, it's the, I don't know, but I'm always going to not know, no matter how much evidence there is. That's unfortunately, in some cases, what it is.
To Mike and other Christians of his mindset, atheist, agnostics, and in general, non-believers are already set out against his religion. He's reinforcing this us versus them mentality that's inherent to Christianity. Mike does this by labeling anybody that's not immediately convinced by his explanations as having some kind of secret motive to denying it. This is just a disingenuous tactic. In this section, Mike also talks about how these questions are meant to challenge or refute Christ, and therefore are bad questions or only come from ill-intentioned people. This is meant to stop you from critically questioning Christianity. He seems to want you to immediately accept his answer as a good answer and either be convinced by it or at least get you to stop asking questions. Now he's going to go back to talking about how Jesus refuses to give a sign to the Pharisees for the fact that he's God.